Alrighty. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to October's Lunch and Learn. We're going to give it a few minutes to allow folks to join. Thank you so much for being here today. Again, we're going to give it a couple minutes to let people join the call. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to get started in just a couple of moments. Welcome to this month's Lunch and Learn. We're going to get started in about 1 minute. Thank you all for being here early. We're going to just give a few moments for our friends to join us. Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. We're going to get started in just a minute. I'm going to give it about 30 more seconds to allow some more folks to join the call. And then we're going to go ahead and get started. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started with this morning's program. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Emily, and I work on the Programs and Outreach team here at the Enoch Pratt Free Library. Thank you for joining us for this month's edition of Lunch and Learn, Real Learning, Real Impact, the Digital Scholarship and Museum Partnerships Project. This program is presented in partnership with the Maryland State Archives and the Maryland 4 Centuries Project. If you have any questions during the program, please enter them into the comment or chat box below your video and we'll address them at the end of the lecture. And now I'll turn it over to Owen at the Maryland State Archives.
Thank you, Emily, and thank everyone today for being here. My name is Owen Lurie. I'm the Outreach Coordinator at the Maryland State Archives. These Lunch and Learn lectures are an opportunity to hear stories of Maryland's people and to highlight the use of different kinds of source materials and the value of archives in uncovering our shared heritage. The Maryland State Archives holds records of permanent value of the state of Maryland and serves as the state's historical agency. If you are interested in exploring our records for your own research, I hope that you will come and check us out. You can contact us and schedule a research appointment on our website, msa.maryland.gov. I hope that you'll join us next month on November 14th when John Seidel and Charles Fithian will talk about their work to uncover the history of the Battle of St. George's Island in 1776, one of the few Revolutionary War battles in Maryland. You can find a full list of programs, including videos of past presentations, on our website. You can, of course, find many more programs from the Pratt Library at prattlibrary.org. And now, to introduce our speakers, here's Bert Kummerow, Founding Director of the Maryland 4 Centuries Project.
Well, thank you so much, Owen, and welcome everyone. And thanks again to our partners, the Maryland State Archives and the Enoch Pratt Free Library. Our partnership is devoted to featuring the best new research into Maryland history. Now, the United States is only a little more than a year from its 250th year. That's quite a milestone for a democratic republic. As I remember, only Iceland is older. It's also an important time to look at our history in order to face our future right now. Our Maryland's 4 Centuries Project is devoted to putting Maryland's own important history into the mix. We have discovered about 150 double historic firsts that are both in Maryland and in the nation. Each first is backed by an institution. Some are large, some are small, and they're dotted all over the state. Together, they create a Maryland mosaic, a portrait of a border state that is also important in understanding the American experience. Now, we're a small state, but we have a big history. And working closely with the Maryland's U.S. 250th Commission, the Maryland Mosaic Project is building programs for 2026 that will help all of us understand where we have been and where we are going. Now, today we have a program that looks to me both enlightening and encouraging. Washington College has created a project with that imposing title, Digital Scholarship in Museum Partnerships, or they call it DSMP. Whenever those of us from the Xerox or analog generation meet the digital world, we get encouraged but intimidated at the same time. This project, however, is more encouraging in the telling. We have two experts here from different disciplines who are all good storytellers. Most importantly, they want to tell us about the new digital tools available that can tell our stories in exciting and innovative ways. Now, while studying history, I discovered two ideas that have always stuck with me. Archaeologist Jim Dietz presented the story of early New England, in part through his study, quote, of small things forgotten, unquote. Those are the humble, everyday items of households and farms. Dietz discovered them while digging in 17th century sites. And then he studied the entries in early probate death inventory records where they are listed. Another New England author by the name of Howard Mansfield described the, quote, memory houses, unquote. These are homes and other structures that survive from previous generations. These memory houses reach out to me, and they reach out from the past, but it is an uphill battle to get Americans to pay attention and remember them as valued components in their community. And what better way is there to experiment with new technologies than to go to the neglected regional small museums dotted around, often run by devoted volunteers that are looking both to preserve their memory houses and their collections. And they're out to tell their stories to as many of us as possible. I salute Washington College for reaching out to its neighborhood museums, helping them try out new technologies that just might get the rest of us to take a longer look. After looking at their samples now on the internet, I can't but think that the imaginary holodecks, full virtual recreations of past and present exotic places that were featured in TV Star Trek, may not be very far in our future. Today, we have Washington College's digital duo here to describe what the DSMP might mean for our museum future. Raven Bishop is an educational technologist who is leading the way in virtual augmented reality in the college's Miller Library. And Dr. Sarah Clark DeReza is an associate professor of education who is leading a program in museum, field, and community education. It looks to me like they have their bases covered, and I can't wait to hear what they have in store for us as they use a new technology to marry our cultural future with our past. Please give a warm welcome to our Washington College presenters.
Well, thank you all so much. We couldn't have asked for a warmer welcome than that. And we appreciate all of you out there for joining us for lunch today. We'll start by saying thanks to the Maryland State Archives, to Maryland 4 Centuries Project, and to the Enoch Pratt Free Library for inviting us to be your lunch guests this afternoon. The Digital Scholarship Museum Partnerships Project, which Raven's gonna share a screen for here in a minute, is our project. We do lovingly call it DSMP, mostly to save space for such a long title, is focused on bringing undergraduate students and community museums together to do transformative technology work. Today, in our time together, we're going to describe our project. I'm going to start by introducing our team, sharing our project goals and outcomes, and then ultimately we'll dive into some specifics about implementation, including sharing some information with you about technology and strategies we use to do the work. So I'm Sarah DeReza. I'm an associate professor of education at Washington College and the director of the Museum, Field, and Community Education program. I'm joined today by my colleague Raven Bishop, who's the assistant director of educational technology and the director of our virtual and augmented reality and digital imaging studio, VARDIS, in Washington College's Miller Library. Our third project partner, Dr. Julie Markin, is an associate professor of anthropology, and she directs Washington College's archaeology program. Washington College, for those of you who don't know, is a small but mighty liberal arts school on Maryland's Eastern Shore, located in rural, yet dynamic, diverse, and delightful Kent County, Maryland. Our project team also includes hundreds of students, dozens of community members, and countless other supporters and collaborators throughout our community, and we'll highlight some of their work and show you many pictures of them in this process today. So digital scholarship in museum partnerships has two mutually interdependent goals. First, to provide greater access to the rich local histories held in Kent County's many small volunteer-managed museums. And second, to give Washington College students the opportunity to develop skills in community-engaged research and service. Our collaborations center around the use of low-cost, easily accessible technologies to create virtual and augmented reality online content. This content helps museums meet their educational and outreach missions. We know the power of technology, as scary as it can sometimes be, and we know its utility for protecting and sharing museum stories. Because of this, it feels particularly important for us that high-tech, high-impact work not just be the thing of large institutions that are well-resourced and telling large national stories, but that it's our obligation to make sure that the small stories housed in our community collections, archives, and volunteer-led museums can also be shared in that same widely accessible way. As educators, we are always thinking about our works in terms of student learning outcomes. For high-tech community-embedded museum project like ours, we're hoping our students will gain skills and competencies in 5 key areas. And you'll see we've used these icons here today to try to differentiate these learning goals. You'll see them throughout our presentation as we share some of the data on the impacts our students have expressed to us as a result of participating in DSMP. So first, we think that by entering into dynamic, large team projects like the one we run, we encourage students to build essential skills in teamwork, collaboration, and communication across difference and in diverse project teams. We're always looking for students to find opportunities to connect theory to practice, to engage with their reading in classrooms with direct applied experience in the field. By bringing our students into greater and more meaningful contact with the communities around Washington College, we want them to begin to see themselves as belonging to this place. It's their temporary home for a couple of years. But while they're here, we want them to think of themselves as community members and meaningful and engaged citizens and participants in the place around us. And in so doing, encourage them to think about how it's their obligation to help solve some of the challenges and address some of the problems that are unique to the place that we live. Finally, we want our students to see the utility of this work with technology, with museums, with collaboration, as a part of their own personal and professional goals. While many of the students that Raven, Julie, and I work with are a part of Washington College's Museum Field and Community Education program, many others aspire to be anthropologists, technologists, art historians, social workers, the list goes on. We believe that regardless of their major or professional ambitions, students stand to gain something applicable and meaningful by doing this community engaged work. Lucky for us, we have amazing community partners who are up for undertaking this with this bunch of bright, ambitious, and high energy undergraduate students. You'll see, and Raven will point out later, lots of pictures of young people without a lot of formal training, handling museum objects and digitizing and doing all of this really hands-on work. It's awesome for our students, but it also requires that we have awesome partners who are willing to go there with us and sort of take this risk. To date, our project has worked with 5 of the 8 museums of Kent County. The Betterton Heritage Museum, which shares the history of Betterton's rise and fall as a tourist destination in the middle 1900s. The Wharton Point African American Schoolhouse Museum, which is a one-room schoolhouse that proudly served the Wharton community during school segregation from 1890 to 1958. The Rock Hall Waterman's Museum, which holds a large collection of photos and artifacts documenting the life and culture of our community's watermen, who make their living harvesting oysters, crabs, and fish from the Chesapeake Bay and its many tributaries. The Sumner Hall Grand Army of the Republic Museum, one of 2 standing Civil War era African American veterans organizations in the United States. And finally, our last year's project partner, the Kent Museum, whose large collection documents the long history of agricultural work and life in this region. One of our project philosophies is small is a strength. And I liked the introductory comments that suggest that this might be a common theme in many conversations about history and local history in Maryland. DSMP is the real embodiment of this idea that many hands working together make light work. When we get asked to measure the project, its impact quantitatively, we like to say things like we've engaged in the last 6 years more than 150 students in this project. That might not seem like a lot of students, but Washington College has on average about 1,000 students at it. So 150 students is a huge portion of our student population over time who's working in these community engaged ways. Our work has been led by faculty, staff, and students from a wide range of programs. We've created digital collections, collected oral histories, developed virtual tours, and augmented reality banners. Raven's going to show you many of these products in the subsequent slides, but they all build upon each other to create this greater whole. And we've been fortunate to be invited to join communities like yours and others around the country and around the world to share our work as well. Each time we meet a new audience, it's really exciting to us because we get to reflect on our work and have it be challenged and have conversations around its implementation and work with other places. And we're looking forward to that conversation at the end of our hour today as well. Okay, so that's the forefront material. Now I'm going to turn it over to Raven to let her answer the question you probably all have, which is like, okay, so what does it look like to do? So with that, I'll turn it over to Raven Bishop.
Speaking of the tech of it all, I just unmuted myself, I think. Can you hear me? All right. So the Digital Scholarship and Museum Partnerships Project produces 2 primary front-facing digital deliverables. The first is virtual tours. So our virtual tours begin with digitizing objects chosen by our museum partners. And you'll see in this first picture a student photographing an object in a small pop-up light box right there in the museum. The project then passes to another group of students that conducts oral history interviews with community and museum stakeholders, again, chosen by our museum partners. And then both of those assets produced through those parts of the project get placed as interactive buttons in 360 photograph-based virtual tours. So that looks like this. So this is an example of one of the virtual tours. This is the virtual tour that we created in collaboration with Sumner Hall. So as Sarah said earlier, Sumner Hall is situated right here in Chestertown, Maryland, and it is a Grand Army of the Republic building. It was a veterans organization founded by Civil War veterans and is one of only 2 still standing African-American GAR buildings in the country. And we are so proud as a community to have Sumner Hall here in Kent County, here in Chestertown, and continuing to do the work of holding space for and uplifting African-American history and culture in the region. So as you can see with the virtual tour, we can pan around and see where this museum is situated in our community. We can enter the building. And Sumner Hall has 2 floors. So in a moment, we can go into its main first floor exhibit space. And then later we can either take the stairs or the elevator upstairs to see the top floor of this historic building. So for now, we'll go in the lower level. And so this is what you'll see when you walk into Sumner Hall. Sumner Hall does not have a permanent collection, but instead changes out its exhibit. So as we worked in Sumner Hall, the exhibit that was on display was a founders exhibit. So you'll notice that there are names of individuals across the top of this building's first floor walls, and the banners or the panels that are on the wall tell the story of each of those founders. So here, when we click a button, we can see what that panel looked like, and then it is transcribed here to make it easier to read. And there are also clips from oral history interviews embedded along the wall as well, and we'll take a look at some of those in a moment. So you can see that we can navigate through the space, move ourselves around, and see what was on display at the time these photos were taken. I should also note that because these digital assets are embedded in a presentation, the buttons are showing up a little bit larger than they are on other devices. So when you encounter these tours on an iPad or a phone or on your computer, it'll look slightly different. It's appearing larger right now because it's an embed in an embed being presented online. So again, you'll see, speaking of these buttons, you can click them and learn more about the objects on display. So this is a Civil War era kepi, or a hat, that would have been worn by Civil War era veterans. And this photograph, these photographs of this hat were taken by a student who was a first year student. He is a war history buff who happened to be in one of our programs in his orientation program. So he took these photos, getting to touch a historic object and photograph it in the first 2 days of his being here at Washington College. So again, to underscore Sarah's point that our museums really have a lot of trust and collaboration with us and create these amazing opportunities for our students. Another thing that is embedded are oral history interview clips. So I will let this one play. It speaks for itself.
When you think of the amount of soldiers, Black soldiers, that actually left and they were willing to give up their lives and join the Union Army, that in itself is a big story. And then this is a legacy for all those men that were willing to give up their lives. So in the broader arena, that's exactly what it means. You know, it's like a symbol. It's like paying tribute to all the men that were willing.
So many of the museums that we partner with, when we interview stakeholders that the museum connects us with, they are often individuals who have been influential in establishing the museum, continuing to steward the museum forward, or who they themselves have lived the histories that the museums convey. So there you heard somebody who has had a hand in helping this museum continue to steward its story forward and talking about the significance of the space. So here we are in the upstairs of Sumner Hall. This space, because it often does not have an exhibit, it's often used as a meeting space and historically had been used as a meeting space. We decided to think about the past, present, and future by moving through the space virtually. So as you move closer to the stage, you move from past, present to future, and then there's an opportunity to stand on the stage. And if you were to click these buttons, you would hear reflections of individuals who are part of the museum and community sharing their reflections and visions for Sumner Hall, both past, present, and future. So that's an example of our virtual tours. The other principal forward-facing digital project that we create are augmented reality enhanced museum panels. And these are both digital and physical. What they are pop-up retractable vinyl banners that Sarah's students in her Designing and Measuring Learning course produce. And you'll see here in this picture, I have scanned a QR code on one of these panels, and I'm sharing a digital version of these panels with one of our museum stakeholders. This is Miss Irene Moore from the Wharton Point Schoolhouse. And I'm sharing with her the embedded digital content that shows up when you scan these banners with a smartphone or an iPad. So this is an example of one of those banner sets. The first banner typically has information about the museum itself, and then the 3 subsequent banners attend to broad themes that emerged throughout our year of collaboration with the museum. And so this is a panel set that we made in collaboration with the Waterman's Museum in Rock Hall. And you can see that when I click on the digital version, a digital copy of this banner pops up. And like the virtual tours, the banner is embedded with oral history interview clips. It's also often embedded with links to the virtual tour, and it has interactive 3D models of museum objects. So here is something that should be familiar to us Marylanders, but may not be to others who are new to the region or not from the region, or even students who maybe are not close to the water. These are oyster shells. You can see the barnacles on these shells here. We can spin them around, look at them from all sides, and get a really nice sense of this object in these 3D models. And again, these are embedded with clips from oral history interviews.
When we were kids, you could take an inner tube and a bushel basket and go out there and catch, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 dozen salt crabs in a day.
So how do we do this? The Digital Scholarship and Museum Partnerships Project uses a distributed model to accomplish the work of building the virtual tours and producing the augmented reality enhanced museum banners. And what we mean by a distributed model is throughout the course of the year, many different groups of students in a variety of programs and courses are going to work on an aspect of the project that's all going to come together in the end to produce these deliverables. So the year-long sort of timeline of our collaboration usually begins in the late spring prior to the academic year that we are in collaboration with our museum partners. So we have a few meetings with our museum partners and we speak with them. We hear about their desires for the project moving forward and what they want to convey to an audience. Once we have our planning in place, the next and one of the most dynamic parts of this project is students in our Orientation Explore program. What we like to say is descend upon the museum and participate in photographing objects and digitizing objects selected by the museum. And we'll speak a little bit more about each of these parts as we move forward, but this is a very exciting part of the project. This project then passes from this 3-day summer program to a semester-long course, often museum studies or anthropological methods, in which students interview community stakeholders and take those oral history interviews, document them, and create clips that are then put into our digital deliverables. The project then passes to Sarah's students in Designing and Measuring Learning, and often in conjunction with museum field and community education interns. And those students design the banners that we just shared with you based on the work of these previous groups of students. And then finally, once those banners are designed, the project is passed to students who work for me in Vardis, which again is our virtual augmented reality digital imaging studio in Washington College's Miller Library. Those students add the augmented reality content to the banners. They also do some sort of bringing it all together work and start preparing the project to be passed off to our museum partners. And they, throughout the course of the year, have been working behind the scenes to build the 3D models that you saw. And at the very end of the project, all of the digital assets that we created are given back to the museum. So the museum has all of the oral history interviews that we've taken, all the photographs students have taken, digital files for the banners, QR codes and embed codes to use to link people to the virtual tours, all of the 360 photos that we've created, and any other digital asset gets handed back to the museum. And so that's the DSMP model and our distributed workflow. So the next portion of the presentation has these slides that are sort of chunked into different parts. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into each step of that DSMP process so that you can see what it looks like in action. And there's so much to talk about with DSMP, so we've tried to sort of divide each slide into these different sections. So this section here will tell you about where we are in the process. This section here will tell you what students think about DSMP and their experience within it based on interviews with 32 students that we did as part of our research on this project. You'll see some pictures of what this work looks like in action with students at the helm of the technology and collaborations. And down below, people always want to know about the tech of it all, even though to us the technology is exciting, but it's not as exciting as our students working in the community and in our museums. So we've put the tech of it all, what we're using technologically to build everything, and there are QR codes that will link you to all of this tech stuff. This is also all on our website, the technology. So in the project initiation, again, we're meeting with our museum partners, asking them questions, learning more about their museum. Sometimes that also involves setting the museum up to take 360 photos. So here is a student who's actually like arranging things in a case. So they're knelt down and arranging objects, which is so exciting for our students to have a chance to do that work. And sometimes the exhibits just need a little zhuzhing to make sure the 360 camera captures what it needs to capture. Speaking of those 360 cameras, here's another student going through the museum. He's using the Theta 360 camera, which is on this stick here. It's this thing on this stick. So he's moving through the museum, building out that virtual tour. And this is that same student and his colleague working in Vardis to build that virtual tour, which then all the other students will put their content into. So some pieces of our research we'd like to highlight here. 100% of student participants agreed that the project activities help them to communicate across difference. And more than 90% of our student participants said that this project helped them become more interested in helping to solve community problems. And again, that comes from working in collaboration with our museum partners, listening to them here at this early outset, and then attending to what we've learned throughout the course of the project. So Orientation Explore, this is that piece that I was talking about that I said was a very dynamic part of DSMP. So here at Washington College, when students come to their orientation program as first-year students, they go through a variety of different place building, team building, and settling in processes that help them start off their freshman year on the right foot. And part of that is Orientation Explore, which is a 3-day interest-based program. I like to say we whisk students away on an academic adventure. So some students go paddling down the Chester River in kayaks. Some of them look at local foodways. Some of them build houses for Habitat for Humanity. Some explore poetry. Some explore board games. And ours works in small museums that we're collaborating with here in our rural areas. They get their hands on museum objects that are chosen by our museum partners. So we always do preface this collaboration by telling our partners, you know, these are 18-year-olds just coming out of high school, so choose appropriate objects that not only tell your story, but can be handled by students with very little training. And then you'll see that we pop up an impromptu photo gallery so that students can photograph objects. They also do some close looking exercises. They talk to community stakeholders to find out, what is this thing? Why is it here in this museum? And ultimately, those photos that they've taken and an object label that they've written end up in the virtual tour and then subsequently feed future research. And more than 90% of participants across our project, student participants, said they'd like to participate in this type of project in future courses. So this really does set the tone for learning in the liberal arts that we do here at Washington College. So then the project passes once again to students in Dr. Markin's Museum Studies courses or Archaeology Methods courses, or at times students in the Museum Field and Community Education program. And those students conduct oral history interviews. So you can see what that looks like here, right? So often students are there in the museum, meeting with community members and recording an interview process where they learn more about this individual's connection to the museum or the histories that it represents. And then those oral history interviews are taken back into the classroom or back into the program where they are time-stamped so future researchers can learn from them. And then students cut clips out of those oral history interviews to embed in the digital aspects of the project. 100% of participants agreed that the project activities help them to see how course concepts can be applied to solving real-world problems and help them to understand the basic concepts and theories of the subject in practice. And that's a really important aspect of our work, that the things that students are learning about in the classroom, best practices in the museum field, they actually get a chance to practice those practices in the world. And more than 90% of participants said that as a result of the project activities, they are more comfortable with in their dealings with people of diverse backgrounds. And more than 80% said that participation in the project helped them appreciate the importance of working in a team when solving community problems. So students really do understand that they are solving a real world problem. Small, volunteer-driven museums having access to technologies that help to propel their stories forward. And so then the project passes to Sarah and her students in the education department. Those students look at the work of the previous students and derive from that work 3 broad themes that have emerged from the work that the previous students have created. They use Canva to design interpretive banners. So you see some of them here in the Wharton Point Schoolhouse on display. And those students, it amazes me every year that they're able to look at all of the resources that previous groups of students have developed and are able to make these really beautiful and really well-told interpretive banners for the museum partners. And we often say that the students, what they're doing is conceptualizing these banners. There is some post-processing that happens afterwards where we make sure that the text is factually accurate and flows properly, and do some design zhuzhing to make sure that the product is a quality product that is given out to the museum. But the students do an amazing job of building those through lines and threading that story through and curating images to use. So in this work, more than 90% of participants said that the project activities they performed in class made them feel more interested in attending class. You know, when you have that real world project, you have the stakes are a little bit higher and you have more excitement about that. And they would recommend providing this type of project to other students who will take the class in the future. And more than 90% of students said that the project activities have helped them improve their communication skills in a variety of ways that you've heard throughout this, right? Not only writing and visually communicating, but also curating and narrowing down topics and working with other individuals. And then finally, again, the project passes to students in Vardis who work on sort of bringing it all together. They finalize 3D models of the objects. You see students in that process building those 3D models here. They also add digital content to the banners using a platform called ThingLink, which is what we use for both of our virtual tours and our banners. It's an easy plug and play platform to use. And students are sort of doing the like wrap up work here over their summer micro internship. More than 80% of our participants said that participating in the project fostered personal insights and growth. They gained practical experience that would appeal to future employers, graduate schools, and scholarship reviewers, and they've gained confidence in their decision to pursue a certain major. So these projects really do have transferable skills that help students in their future endeavors. And then finally, at the end of about a year-long process, this usually bleeds into the fall of the following academic year. The museum receives everything back. So all of the full-length oral history interviews, all of the clips, the timestamps, the photos that students took in Orientation Explore, links to 3D models, 360 photos, everything digital that we've created is given back to the museum. They're also given iframes for the virtual tour and for the digital banners, and they are then used in a variety of ways. Museums of Kent, this is their QR code here, and it's museumsofkent.org, is an association of our local museums, and they embed the virtual tours on each museum's webpage on their main website. And our county tourism office uses the virtual tours. So this is the link to one of the virtual tours here on the county tourism office, so that potential visitors to our region can use those virtual tour links and get a sense of what all that our museums have to offer. This is also really important because as volunteer-run museums and also seasonal, often seasonal spaces, they're not always open all the time. And so having an opportunity for folks to view these museums in advance and in the off-season is really useful to convey the message of the museum forward. And so I will pass this off to Sarah to talk about next steps.
Thanks, Raven. I love giving these presentations. It's so exciting to just to see again with fresh eyes the stuff that we're sort of always in the weeds with at any given moment, sort of working through. I want to say we're curious about how to do our work better. So we're focusing moving forward in the next couple of years on studying our own process a little more, conducting research with participants, thinking about how we can scale or share this model so that other people can implement it in their communities. I suspect some of you listening are thinking, wow, that's really great. I can't imagine how I could do something like that without X, Y, and Z. We think it is possible for folks to do similar kind of distributed model and collaborative work, regardless of the context that they're working in. And to a certain extent, regardless of their level of expertise with these technologies. And so one thing that Raven and Julie and I are really interested in doing moving forward is finding ways to support capacity building, to build models that are kind of plug and play or transferable between communities and institutes of higher ed or other partners that are just curious about how they can do similar work. And so stay tuned in the next couple of years for a little bit more from us in terms of sharing sort of our research and perhaps a more transferable model or process. If you're thinking, Raven, you want to go to the next slide? We're teachers, right? I mean, I don't know if you can tell this by our general energy but both Raven and I were middle school, we're secondary educators before we joined the college community. I always say that Raven has good middle school energy, and that's one of the best things about working with her. But we love a rubric and we like to reflect on our teaching practice. So we do have for you to think about this sort of set of questions that we've derived from our practice and from our own reflection over the course of the now 7 years that we've been doing this project. So questions for you and your organization or other partner organizations to consider as you set forth into collaborative work. These are really, they come from our work, but we think they're useful for guiding practice in lots of different kinds of collaborations. So hopefully we can share this information with you in other ways, but hopefully you can take a couple of minutes as you consider your future work to reflect on these questions of practice as well. And finally, in closing, before we open for questions and comments. We just want to thank the many people who have made this work possible for us. We're often totally blown away by the fact that we have never received major grant funding for this project, but we have beautifully pieced it together through just an amazing network of support here over at Washington College and on the Upper Shore, from college to community partners to regional nonprofits. Lots of folks have lent their support and their kindness and their time and their treasure to making the Digital Scholarship and Museum Partnership Project happen. And so we would be remiss to end without thanking them, and also thanking you again for joining us today. We're looking forward to the conversation to follow.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that amazing presentation. We do have some questions in the chat, and actually the first one was asking about funding. You kind of touched on that at the end of your presentation, but could you talk about that a little bit more?
Yes, so funding is important. I think I'm probably preaching to the choir here a little bit to say that we started this project with a really clear goal to do it as low barrier to entry as we possibly could. And so Raven can say more about this, but on our website, we have listed all the technology that we use, which we have chosen both for its relative inexpensiveness and its relative ease of use. Those principles govern all of the work that we do. I think the long and short answer to the funding question is that when you use a sort of distributed model or a partnership model, you can pull little bits of money from lots of places, and that's really how we've been successful in doing it. I will say though, this the use of technology to increase access to museum collections and archives is a topic of high interest, particularly post-COVID, when we all had to sort of scramble to figure out how we were going to do this work after the fact. I think more and more organizations are interested in folks' proactive planning and approach to the use and integration of technology into their work. And so if you were looking to pursue larger pots of money, I suspect you would find good energy out there for this kind of work as well. Raven, do you want to say more about cost?
Sure. So a lot of the tech tools that we're using are tech tools that our community partners would be familiar with. So iPads, right? DSLR cameras, inexpensive camcorders, those kinds of things. Again, we chose these technologies because, one, we had them on hand here at the college, right? Here in the educational technology department, these are tools of the trade that we had class sets of and we were able to access. And in addition, there are things that museums can often procure and then be able to weave into their work. Some of the more like high-tech equipment that we're using, the 360 cameras, run anywhere between $300-400 to about $1,100. So that is an investment. But again, this is one of the benefits for our museum partners working with a college partner. We have that here, that equipment here in educational technology in our library, so we can make use of that in our community. Also, as an educational institution, some of the platforms that we use, the software platforms that we use in our digital scholarship work, we have education pricing for, right? Because they are in use in the classroom. And so instead of individual museum institutions trying to purchase software piecemeal, we have that software here at the college, and it's there for student use, and we're using the educational pricing too. So these kind of synergistic collaborations also have an economic kind of piece to them. And then in terms of funding, we have received small grants. So each year we apply to Kent Cultural Alliance, which is one of our local arts organizations that has a small grant program. We use that funding to pay for a printed copy of the banners for our museum partners. So we work with our museum partners to write those small grants. And Kent Cultural Alliance has been an amazing supporter of our work. When we worked with the Wharton Point Schoolhouse, we had some funding through the Chesapeake Heartland Project. That is an amazing project also happening here at Washington College. It's a digital scholarship project surrounding regional African American history. And because we had that funding during that time, we were able to also write a small grant through Stories of the Chesapeake, So that project was accelerated by that support. But largely, year to year, outside of the tech equipment of it all, it's human power, it's relationship power, and I don't know, probably under $2,000, and it's pretty much printing of these banners.
Hmm. That's really amazing, the scope of work that you're able to do and piece everything together. That's fascinating. Someone else was wondering, how did you go about finding folks for your oral histories? Can you talk about that a little bit more, about that process?
Yeah, we really rely on our community partner to make all of those on the ground decisions. So they're choosing the objects that we're digitizing. They're finding the folks in their communities, part of their boards, their stakeholders, their neighbors, inviting them to participate in the project. And so we're offering the sort of the tech and the building. The content is coming almost exclusively from the community. And so they open that invitation and bring those folks to the table.
Amazing. Diane asks, I often think of local museums as being underfunded and understaffed. Are local museums welcoming of student help?
Yeah, so our experience has been that our museum partners are really happy to have us there. They've often reported that it's bringing a whole bunch of fresh energy into their spaces. It often helps museum stakeholders think about their collections in new ways. They often comment that they're excited to hear what students think is interesting and exciting. Some of the objects that students marvel over are surprises to our community partners. I would say too that it's also really important to note, and we've peppered it throughout this conversation, that we are getting a lot out of this project too. So this is definitely a mutually beneficial project. In addition to the museum getting all of these digital assets and this new energy in their spaces, they're also opening their spaces to us and like letting a bunch of students descend upon their museum, touch their things, talk to their people, and build relationships and produce something that they can share with the community. So it's really one of the most joyful parts of our work, and it's also it's a leap for both organizations, and it's mutually beneficial. We should also note, we didn't say this in our presentation, but we check in with our museum in between each of those like nodes on our timeline. And at any point, either party could say, I think we're finished, and like move away. And then they would still have like whatever we've created up until that point. So we've intentionally built in opportunities to end the project if either party felt like they needed to. To date, we haven't had to, and it's been a wonderful collaboration, but we've been intentional too, because a new partnership is always a new adventure, right? So we've been intentional to build those points in the process along.
I think one thing I'll add to that is just that oftentimes the model we have for like student collaborations with community partners is something like an internship model. So a community partner approaches a college or a school and says, we need someone to do this thing. But oftentimes in our volunteer-led community museums, the person who's there might not have, the reason they're soliciting help, right, is because they don't have necessarily the skills or expertise to meet the need that they're asking for help in. What we find sometimes is that our students don't really have that skill or expertise either. And at Washington College, we're working exclusively with undergraduate students. And so that sort of one-to-one internship model that tends to be the way that small museums and colleges collaborate, it can be incredibly powerful and really successful. But this sort of mediated and cumulative model we've found has much sort of greater and more sustained impact, because no one person is on the hook for sort of like making something bigger than any one of them is capable of doing on their own. And so that in part has addressed some of those, the sort of internship model challenges that we've experienced in the past.
That's great. I personally would really love to know what you think your biggest achievements have been over the course of this project and what you're looking forward to in the next 2 years.
You should start, Raven.
So this project has so many moving parts, and so many it's the stories and these like aha moments that happen throughout the way that are really meaningful to me. Anecdotes aren't, quantitative, but they really do tell the story. So, one of the years we were working with the Betterton Heritage Museum, and we had a student who grew up in Ocean City. And so part of the history of Betterton is that as the automobile became ubiquitous and people could get to the Atlantic beaches, the tourist trade on bay beaches here on the Eastern Shore shifted. It's a much more complex story than I just noted, but that's the broad strokes. And so the student who grew up in an Atlantic beach in Maryland didn't realize that the rise of her town's tourist industry was meant also the decline of another town's tourist industry. And so she really learned about a history that she had never known about. And so that was a really powerful experience. Another time, we brought a group of students to the Wharton Point African American Schoolhouse, and one of the students said, I learned about school segregation and school integration in my history books. It was taught in my high school. But until I stood in this building, it didn't occur to me that that happened everywhere in the United States. And gee, I wonder what it was like in my hometown. And like, that's what you want. And that's the power of small, rural, regional museums. They take that national story and they personify it in a way that only a small museum can. And so bringing students into these spaces and allowing them to, what we say, lead through learning, allowing their learning to help make them leaders in getting these stories out to the community, also creates these really personal and meaningful points of excitement and curiosity and interest and agency that, we have a million of those stories, and that to me, that's the achievement. The tech of it all is wonderful, but it's those moments that really are the achievement for me. Oops, Sarah, you're muted.
Oh, that's okay. I was just going to tell another million awesome stories. For me, one thing, another high point is the surprising ways in which our museum partners have come to use these materials we've created beyond the scope of our project. So we often hear and see these banners popped up in any constellations at community events, street fairs, celebrations. We've learned from a couple of our partners that they're using the virtual tours to train their volunteers and docents in a way they've never been able to do before. And so like they're serving as teaching and instructional tools within and without those museums in a way that, we never really planned for, and that's been really exciting to see. So the kind of possibilities are endless. There's so many points of pride. I think one thing Raven and I often say, we're not from here. We've come here, which especially in the Eastern Shore is an important distinction. But being a part of this project has made us feel more connected to the place that we've chosen as our home and where we're raising our own children. And that's the beauty of collaboration. That's the beauty of regional history and regional storytelling. And one of the reasons that it feels incredibly important for us to make sure that it's preserved and maintained amongst this sort of broader landscape of big national stories.
Mm-hmm. And the last thing I'll add to that too, and you've heard us say it throughout the presentation, it's not about the tech, it's not about the tech, it's not about the tech. One thing that's important to note when you're using emerging technologies like virtual tours and AR stuff is that those technologies are likely not to be here in the next, 5-10 years in the way that they are right now. So if you think about like the first digital cameras and how grainy those pictures look to us now, as opposed to how high tech they looked back then, these technologies are in their infancy. And so what we say to our museum partners is, we could build you a virtual tour and 5 years from now, it might not work anymore. So think of this as an exhibit, not a permanent installation, but all the stuff behind it, all of those oral history interviews that we captured with your community members, those photographs of objects that are now in digital form that you can use in a variety of different ways, all of the new aha moments that were created through this collaboration, like that's the good stuff, right? The tech of it all is the shiny packaging, but the interaction and what comes out of it and the digitization work is really important. And so if the shiny like tech thing can beget the thing that like creates all of that work, then we're excited to be vehicles of that, and that the technology can be vehicles of that.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you so much, Raven and Sarah, for sharing your work with us this afternoon. It's such an essential part of the history in your area, and we're just so happy to hear about it today. I'd also like to thank our partners at the Maryland State Archives and the Maryland 4 Centuries Project. Thank you to the Hearing and Speech Agency for providing us with accessibility for today's program. And as always, thank you to our audience today for joining us. We couldn't have these programs without you, so thank you so much for being here. And with that, we'll close today's program. Everybody stay safe, take care, and have a great rest of your day.